everyone, welcome to Chandler's channel. I'm Tracy, your host, and today's session is our intuitive vlog with Whitehawk's wisdom on ADD and ADHD, attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, the two of them I understand kind of go hand in hand, and they have similarities but things that make them different as well. So I don't really understand these disorders, so I'm not going to put my own comments in at this point in time. So we'll just move on, and I'll get Whitehawk and see what he has to say about these disorders. Excuse me, it's been a long time since I started off with a yawn. Let's see where this goes. Indeed, he says. What can one say about these disorders that is not or has not been said in a very lengthy letter or writings? And it's like I'm seeing a computer screen, and I'm seeing like writing, right? Lots and lots of writing as you sort of scroll down the screen. He says there has been so much written on these disorders. He says one could not possibly read everything. So, what can I tell you that's different, that will help you with your plight, with your child or yourself? Well, I can tell you this. You must continue to move forward regardless of your diagnosis. You must continue to move forward in a world that is not only not built for people such as you and I, who are extremely sensitive beings and individuals, he says. There's ancient Chinese secret, huh? And so now you are lining up, asking the right questions, he says, finally. And the questions go something like this, he says. So are you saying that I am somehow not built for this world because of all this stimulus? And he answers, Whitehawk answers, yes. Our bodies cannot take the daily pounding of stimuli around us, that we are berated with, he says. We cannot withstand the amount of stimuli within the society, he says. When you go out, I want you to look with new eyes, with fresh eyes, he says, and see all the stimuli that exists in the world, he says. Everything, he says, from your commute, he says, to when you arrive at your destination, to not only when you arrive at your destination, he says, but more importantly, from within your own self. From the stimulation from within your own self. From the barragedness of thoughts in your head, he says. Yes, those thoughts, those nasty, niggly little thoughts that get in the way of many things, he says, every day. I want you to pay attention to those too. Are they nice thoughts? Are they good thoughts? What are they, he says? They just stream through your mind, he says. Boom, 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 boom. He says, in fact, I don't even think you give a thought to your thought. He says, if you think about it, they just stream through one's mind so quickly that he says, how could we not be stimulated, he says, simply by the overthinking we do, he says. And so he says, I think if you look around, you will notice all the stimuli that is out there. It is too much for our poor human bodies. We have not adapted to this society. He says we are not meant for this day and age of this electronical society, he says. And so I just want to sort of take a step back here and just check in at some body signals I've had. And he says, yes, he says the clearing of your throat was just to make you more aware of your environment, he says. And indeed you did so, he says. He says, as for the other signals, he says, indeed it could have stated, he says, that you were irritated or bugged by something. Indeed, we would be irritated and bugged by being overstimulated, he says, and so we can take it into account that way. He says, mainly what I want you to do, my children, young and old alike, he says, I just want you to look at your environment. See how you can quiet down your environment. Look at the colors in your environment. Are they crazy and loud? Are they dark and dingy? Those will affect you, he says, on a very deep level. One needs lightness in their life to feel of light, he says. On the other side, he says, we cannot have too much light in our life, he says. So if there's too much light in a room for too long, he says, we need to balance that, he says, with turning the lights off for a while, for dimming the lights for a while, he says. For that can be very stimulating, he says, to have so much light for so long, he says, on our heads, on our bodies, he says, in our environment. He says, when you start to look with new and fresh eyes, you see how could you not possibly become overstimulated in our environment. But one place we can control is our home. So look with new eyes in your home. The noises in your home. And me, Tracy, like I'm just hearing my fridge right now, as we're doing this, and it's so annoying, the fan on the fridge, and then I think if the dishwasher's on, and because yes, the washer machine, the dryer, he says, the list goes on and on when you think of the amount of noise that is in your house, not to mention once you open up the computer or you get on the phone or you turn on the TV and then the radio is blaring, he says, and who knows what other devices are on, he says, and creating that buzz effect, he says. And so it can be a very loud and disturbing environment even for the strongest of electronically made up human being, he says, but for the people who are more sensitive, he says, that is just a barrage of problems waiting to happen. He says, and so we need to tone it down. And so for the children in our life, he says, the sweet, sweet, poor children that are affected by all this and told there's something wrong with them when there is indeed not a thing incorrect with them, not a thing. For indeed it is the setup of society that is wrong with them. How do we help them in their schooling? It may be difficult. It may be possible. But again, if you look at their school environment and the amount of stimuli, he says just even a school bell going off, he goes, can be very dislodging, he says, to the nervous system, or distorting to the nervous system. He says, think of everything else in a school. If you think of the lights that get in their eyes when they're walking down the hallway, he says, if you think of the play on from inside the school to where it's hot and stuffy to outside where the air again can still be hot and stuffy in the summer, he says, or again can be go from one extreme to the other, where you go in from a hot, stuffy environment, now you're going out to a very cold environment. So he says, so that will create an overstimulation, he says. And then if you think outside, even outside in nature, he says, there are days when it can be very overstimulating. He says, and an example I can use is a very windy day is a very stimulating day. Perhaps it is not the best day to go outside because we are affected by its force, he says. A light breeze is lovely, but when it's more windy, he says, it can have a definite effect on our nervous system and our body. So when you start to look around with new eyes and fresh eyes, you see the disturbances. He says, so what we do until society catches up with us, he says, yes, catches up with us, for we are far further ahead of them, he says, we have to tail it back a little in our lives by managing our own little world in our life, he says, through our home, through our activities that we go to the places we go to. He says, whether it be we limit where we visit, and for me, Tracy, coming to mind is a shopping mall, right? Like, there's nothing more stimulating to me than a freaking shopping mall with all those people and lights and music of every taste and genre coming out of all different stores. He goes, indeed, that is a very stimulating place, he says. Not to mention the energy of all those different types of people around you and their thoughts and energies surrounding you. He says that can be very stimulating as well. He says, so just to get back, he says, so by limiting places that you go to, he says, for the period of time or going during off-peak hours, he says, you can create a world that is managed with tranquility and peace. He says, and then to manage your own home and your own world by making sure the disturbances are low, he says, noises, everything he says from electromagnetic frequencies, which he says happen to be, the noise that comes out of plugs, anything that's electronic, he says, will emit a frequency, and that on our bodies is stimulating, he says. So anytime you're near a television or a computer or a mobile phone, anything of electronic, he says, even a toy, it's going to emit an electronic frequency, electromagnetic frequency, which we absorb as human beings, he says. A lot of people are not aware of this, but it does affect our systems, our nervous systems. He says, so trying to keep one's bedroom clear of electromagnetic forces, he says, such as televisions and any type of electronics, he says, at all. Keep clear out of your bedroom or your children's bedroom, whether one's ADD, ADHD or not, he says. I do believe these are good things to implement in one's life, he says, but especially if one has ADD and ADHD. And so some person puts their hand up, some person puts their hand up and says, so are you telling me ADD and ADHD people are just really highly sensitive people? He says, yes, in fact, I am telling you that. That is what I am telling you. And so people are kind of ingesting this news, and they're trying to understand it. And he says, let me help you. He says, when our systems become attacked with so much stimulation and overabsorbed with the stimulation, he says, what happens is we kick into a hyperactivity because our systems can no longer cope. He says, deal with all that stimuli. So they have to do so in order to rid itself of all that stimuli or to deal or to cope with it. It sends us into a hyperactivity. So what can one do other than all the things I've just said? But now that you're in a hyperactive state, what is it you can do, he says? You are asking. And he says you simply need to rest at this point in time when you have gone into this state of hyperactivity. He says, you need to take it down many notches. He says, but I do want to throw something in here. He says that this one here, Tracy, I just had a thought of a bus driver who my children are not fond of, and I've dealt with this bus driver before. And because he is angry, and children are sensitive to emotion, they feel his anger and his emotion, and then when he does yell at them, it affects their nervous system, right? And it affects anyone's nervous system when they're screamed at, but it'll affect them like this. So then what happens is, now they don't know what to do, and they become attacked and overstimulated. That what probably happens is then they act out. They act out because they're nervous and they don't know quite what else to do, so they act out, and that creates a hyperactivity. And Whitehawk brings it back and says, yes, indeed. I believe what you're trying to say is that it is another form of stimuli. So when someone is angry at you, it is stimulating. That is a very stimulating emotion. And so when they are attacking you with their words or their energy, he says, one feels it in their nervous system, and it creates a disorder in your nervous system, and it creates the hyperactivity, is what he says. I believe Tracy is trying to express, and I say, that's what I'm trying to express. So then Tracy, what I'm going to say to you is that, so then the children act out even more, and then that gets the bus driver upset even more, and it just kind of goes back and forth, and next thing you know, your child doesn't want to be on the bus, understandably so, but listen to that when your child says that. And if the bus driver says he's acting out, take into consideration, maybe it's the bus driver's energy, maybe your child is not fond of that bus driver's energy and can read it and is frightened of them, or has been attacked by their verbal assaults or through yelling. Just take those into consideration. And so Whitehawk says, yes, very, very well put, he says. A very good example, he says. And so, my friends, what more can I say to you about ADD and ADHD but to manage your world. Manage your world within the world, he says. That is what I will say to you. It is important for these sensitive individuals to get into nature and to be into nature, again, taking into consideration to not go on a very stimulating day, on a day that's blowing gale force winds, he says, or, a blizzard day, because those indeed can be very stimulating days. And again, to stay out too long in the cold would be very stimulating as well. He says, so my children, manage your world within your world, and I think you will find that your life is better, easier to manage until the rest of the world catches up with us, he says. God bless my children in the world. I wish you all the love and the best. God bless. Thanks very much, Whitehawk. Well, there you go. I'm surprised, delighted in a way, because it kind of always was sort of what I thought it was, just a bombardment on our nervous systems, because I'm a highly sensitive person, and I kind of sort of wondered then if ADD and ADHD, although I was never diagnosed with those, growing up or anything, I did sort of wonder if they kind of coincided, and based on what Whitehawk's saying, I believe they do. I don't know if the medical community will believe that, or so on and so forth. But ingest what you've been delivered here. See if they work. The proof is always in the pudding. Getting out in nature helps me a lot. So perhaps it'll help children. And even my children are not ADD or ADHD, but I can see how an effect of a stimulus has on them. So try them, see if they work. Wish you all the best. All right, so that's our reading. We do have our weekly readings on Monday, which provides insight, healings, teachings for the week ahead in that week. God bless. I'm Tracy for Chandler's Channel. See you next time.